Okay, so if you're one of the 3 or 4 people who listened to our news episode earlier this week, you may have heard me say that we wanted to separate Ukraine-related topics from everything else. And so that's what we're doing today. We've kind of gathered a list of random Ukraine-related topics that we want to kind of touch on. Gabby is with us this week because Dr. Mike is out. So welcome back, Gabby. Let me start with this. We're gonna.
I'm here as well, but I don't need any.
Oh yeah,
introduction.
sorry. What's his name?
He doesn't count.
What's his name? Josh is here too. Sorry, Josh. We're gonna look at the unusual angles to this and some of the slightly delicate topics, and there are some related to what's going on in the news. Let's start with this. Chicken Kiev is gone. Chicken Kyiv is in. Pyrogi Ruskie are out. Pyrogi Ukrainskie are in. Suddenly, Russian artists are being disinvited from orchestras and operas around the world. Are we going a little too far with this tokenism, or what is this all about?
I think so. Actually, this was interesting for me. I am in the habit of listening to BBC Radio 3 while I'm making my breakfast because I'm that kind of
kind of guy,
middle-class bourgeois snob, and there's nothing like a little bit of classical music whilst I'm making the coffee or frying.
You tell the butler to turn it up or down.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, this is going back a fortnight or more, I think, but there was a vague eyebrow raised at some classical music event in Cardiff, I think, and they announced that they would be removing all the Tchaikovsky from the evening's performance because of
outrage,
solidarity with, and I'm not the BBC's biggest fan, as both of our regular listeners know, and I was quite heartened to see that, like last week on Radio 3, they were featuring plenty of hitherto virtually totally unknown Ukrainian composers and musicians. There was, of course, a number of composers who are traditionally thought of as being Russian, but are in fact, or were in fact, from Ukraine, because like most of us, for decades and decades, Ukraine was just part of Russia because Russia was the Soviet Union, and all of those places were the same. But they proudly announced a special program of just Tchaikovsky music and with a bit of Rachmaninoff. They're not now.
Let me just play the devil's advocate. Is this, as I mentioned earlier, just tokenism and worthy of kind of ridicule, or is this maybe a sincere effort by people who are not in a position to do anything more meaningful, so that they're doing what they can do, even if it doesn't make a
I think it's a bit of both, isn't it? I mean, it's very easy for us to laugh at it, and I mean, it's not as if the Tchaikovsky estate is winning or losing money either way because it's all out of copyright.
No, but I mean, the thing is, this kind of artistry in Russian history has always been very important to them as a nation, and they're very proud of it. So, the world cancelling Russia, it's kind of meant to kick them in the ghoulies, I suppose. But I don't like it particularly, mind you. Pierogi Ruskie should always have been Pierogi.
You know what?
Well, they're not even Russian, are they? That's just the name of them.
About that Pierogi Ruskie, as a menu item, it wouldn't sell. It wouldn't sell right now. No. So maybe it's a smart thing, even if it's tokenism, even if it's kind of cheap.
Ruskie didn't even mean Ruskie. It was Russian rather than Russian.
So. But what's the big show in the UK? Dancing with the Stars. There's a Russian dancer who's getting disinvited. Even here in Krakow, we're going into what we call marathon season, March and April. May. Famously, we have like 75 million marathons in the spring, and they all ruin traffic and communications in the center of town. And there's talk about banning Russian and Belarusian runners from the marathon. Now, what does this do?
I don't like it.
Well, yeah, it does. It does seem ridiculous, really. I suppose you could very, very somewhat pathetically make the case from a security angle that some kind of like youngish, healthy Russian or Belarusian male might also be a member of the FSB or the USB or whatever.
No, but if you're an organizer, if you're a marathon organizer, I am sympathetic to the idea that, from a PR point of view, are you going to have Russians show up and have them have protesters show up? And if they win, what do you exactly? So it's a mess. And maybe uninviting them is the most convenient way out.
Well, I think,
of
look,
this.
I mean, they've been booted out of the World Cup, the football team. It's like, I mean, at least it's consistent with that. I mean, whether it's fair or not is another angle. But I mean, we're into the whole debate about, is our beef with the Russian nation, with the Russian people, or is it with that short fella that's running things?
Let's move on. As I said, bullet point forum today. How is this whole mess going to affect the Polish tourism industry? For millions of people, Poland right now is associated with refugees, desperate times, images of people in these horrible life situations. Is this going to have an impact on the number of people who are going to want to come here, especially for the first time?
I think, I mean, the obvious thing from a short point of view is that there's just nowhere available for anyone to stay. Of course, all the holiday apartments are currently occupied by refugees.
And as long as there's an active conflict, as long as the boil is still going on to our east, I mean, are people just for security reasons just going to say, you know what, sorry, Poland is just not on this year?
Yeah, I mean, people are questioning whether they're going to come to Poland at all. Should people travel to Europe? Is it all going to kick off? What's going to happen?
And we're just getting over COVID, for Christ's sake, the tourism industry here, which is, let's not forget, very important. And we're just getting over COVID, and now this.
There's a lot of American soldiers in town, isn't there? Have you noticed that?
No. Are there?
I've heard. I'm too lazy to go outside.
I mean, I've seen that kind of small clusters being driven around in Melex carts and everything. But the weird thing, I mean, you know that they are because they're wearing their camouflage fatigues.
Why are they in uniform? That's what I want to know.
Well, this is, I mean, maybe it's, well, I don't know. I mean, you've got American military connections in your family. Maybe it's an obligation. If you're here in an official capacity, you have to be in uniform.
Yeah, but if you're on your own time, you're in civilian clothes. So I don't know.
It is not. But I mean, they've got their names. Maybe it's on their chest. So maybe that's the way.
As you mentioned, I think Gabby said, somebody said it, that these a lot of hotels are booked. So even people who do want to come here, they're going to have trouble finding a place, and the price is not going to be right. So I think we're in for another tough year for the tourism
it's
industry.
Interesting. I mean, related to this, there's a couple of articles in like British media that I've read recently where the serious end, or supposedly serious end of the media, and the journalist has said, wanting to find out more. I took a flight to Krakow last Tuesday, and just arriving there, already the evidence of the conflict in terms of the numbers of refugees and so forth. And this is we're like, what is it, 200 kilometres from the border, and I mean, this is not a war zone. It's the neighbouring country, and
it's not. But there's a lot of people from Ukraine that are coming here through other means as well. Like, I have a friend who went to Hungary to collect Ukrainian refugees to come to Krakow because they want to come to Poland because of the language, basically.
Because they get out through whatever border crossing they can, and then
they come to Poland because of the language, and there's.
I mean, I don't know what the situation is with the border crossings into Hungary, but of course, I mean, people who have been fleeing west from Ukraine via Lviv and then ending up at Medica. I mean, there's been these huge numbers of people. It's taking a long time, even with fast track processes.
We'll get into those numbers in just a second. A different set of numbers first. Next on our list, Polish government announces increased military spending from 2.2% to 3% of GDP, which is actually a very big jump.
Yeah.
Too little, too late. Escalating the problem. Necessary evil. What?
It's a reaction, obviously, isn't it? I mean, we've discussed on previous shows and away from the microphone kind of a number of times, exactly what are Europe's kind of defensive responsibilities. They've been, many countries have been like freeloading off of the United States in terms of NATO. Poland and the UK
have consistently paid.
They have, but I mean, there are sound historical reasons for that, and I mean, I think various, American presidents have. Whilst being to varying degrees critical of, say, Germany's contribution, have always kind of like made the point, well, actually, Poland does keep its end up, and, for good historical reason. And now it would seem that those good historical reasons are somewhat being vindicated. But like you say, I think that the NATO kind of guideline percentage spending of GDP on defence is 2%, which is what the UK does. Poland has already been at 2.2%, jumping up to 3%. as a percentage increase is enormous. I mean, it's like a 45% increase.
And apparently, much of this increase is supposed to be geared towards enlarging the ranks. In other words,
personnel,
not to hardware and to supplies, but to people in uniform. Didn't see any information about concrete goals, but that's the general idea.
250,000 active combat personnel is the aim.
So here's my question then. Because this goes, earlier this week when we had our news episode, we were talking about certain jobs and how it's difficult to attract people to certain jobs. And I said it was because of cultural reasons, not necessarily the money. And I think the same thing applies here when it comes to being a soldier and the military life generally. Culturally, there's a disconnect between the younger generation and the idea of pursuing a career in the armed forces. And I think it's unfortunate that we've lost a lot of respect for the people who do go, down this path in life. Because I think they do deserve respect. But I'm trying to imagine a situation where, I'll say it a different way. I'm trying to imagine how much money they have to offer ordinary enlisted men in the armed forces before it becomes an attractive career choice, and I think that number is pretty high.
It's quite high. I think
higher than the government will go.
Historically, it's always been conscription, hasn't it? I mean,
that ended in Poland some time ago.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, and it's not.
I know it ended, but that kind of mentality, the stories that people tell.
Yeah,
about,
well, it wasn't the entirety of it. It was just that a big percentage of the army was made up of people doing national service. But the other thing, of course, and I only know about this from the British Army kind of perspective, is that if you enlist, if you join the army, it's not like when you go to work for State Street or whatever, and you take the job on, and then after 6 months, you get a better job offer somewhere else, and you can't resign just like that from the army. I mean, if you sign up for, in Britain it used to be 22 years, I think. Then if you wanted to leave before then you'd have to buy your way out.
You have to do something called working your ticket, where they would treat you like absolute garbage.
But you couldn't enlist for like 4 years or something? 22 sounds like quite the obligation.
I think that there are shorter term periods, but I mean, if you wanted to be like, a professional soldier.
Like on a career path.
Yeah. If you wanted to get out, the deal was, if you wanted to get out, you had to be deliberately rubbish, at what you did, and then then the army would treat you like garbage.
Fortunately, I don't think that's the situation here.
Well.
Although I find this personally irritating, and you see this quite a bit in Poland and throughout Europe. Maybe not so much in the UK, but this idea that people who go into the armed forces are somehow from a lower level. They didn't have the brains or the motivation to do something better, and they settled for the army. That's ridiculous. I mean, people in the army, there are highly trained, qualified specialists doing tough jobs, and that's not to mention anything about dedication to their country and wanting to serve their country. I mean, they just don't get the respect they deserve in Poland. I think it's really unfortunate, and I think that it's a cultural thing, and it's a barrier to recruiting these extra 200,000 whatever people they want to put in uniform.
That's not an extra number.
The total number.
The total number would be 250,000.
So I say good luck to them, but that's going to be tough to get that many new soldiers. We'll see. Next on our list. Okay, let's talk about some numbers here. Josh, we just passed 2 million. That's mind-boggling. 2 million refugees, the vast majority of whom have stayed here in Poland. I've seen stats over the last week, something like 15% of Warsaw is Ukrainian now, an extra 100,000 Ukrainians here in Krakow. So we're probably about the same in percentage terms. Right. 2 weeks ago, I was in Kielce, the city of Kielce, halfway between here and Warsaw, and I talked to 4 or 5 different people, and none of them had any idea of the flood that was going on. You don't see it in Kielce. The cars, Ukrainian cars on the streets, Ukrainian people, it's just not happening. And this phenomenon in Poland is largely confined to the biggest of the big cities. Wrocław, Poznan, Trójmiasto, maybe, Warsaw for sure, Krakow
Lublin,
for sure, Lublin absolutely for sure because of its proximity. Absolutely. So I think when we talk about all these refugees coming here, they're not even close to being evenly spread throughout the country. That's the first of our problems. But let me start at a pessimistic view of this, Gabby. I believe that you cannot increase your national population by 2%, and that's what Poland has done, in 1 month without substantial systemic institutional dislocation problems, real problems.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea. I mean, it's unprecedented, really, isn't it? So, I mean, there's things to think about, like work, schooling, because these are mainly women and children as well. So work, schooling.
Josh, it seems that we're still in the era of good feelings and good intentions. We want to help, and the outpouring, like we said last time,
extraordinary.
It's
really,
just
isn't it?
beyond words. The help that has come from in every form, from every angle, people just sacrificing so much to do so much good, and it's great. But I'm worried that reality is going to sit in at a certain point, and that goodwill inevitably is going to diminish.
How long can you keep it up for?
Exactly. How long can you continue to deliver this level of help for people who continue to need that much help? Gabby, you mentioned the schools.
Schooling, yeah.
I'm thinking about this, with kids in school myself. We kind of have good timing right now, if that's not a nice way to say it, but the current school year is coming to an end. But let's fast forward a few months to the end of August, beginning of September, not that far away, really. And if the situation is still this bad, we've got God knows how many Ukrainian kids. And by the way, there's 2 million Ukrainians that could easily increase to 3 million, maybe 4 million by August or September. And about 90% of them are women and school-age kids, right? Maybe not 90%, but a substantial portion. So let's say there are 500,000 Ukrainian kids in Poland in September. Okay, what are we going to do? Are we going to set up a Ukrainian school for them on the assumption that they're going to go back to Ukraine soon, so they should all be together? Are they going to be integrated into Polish schools?
They're going to have to be integrated into
So
Polish.
how does that work with kids who
I
don't
think actually
speak
that's
Polish?
a very, very good question, and I suspect what's going to happen is that it'll be a kind of a combinovatch of the two things. That there will be a degree of attempted integration. Temporary classrooms. Things will be expanded. I think also there will very likely be temporary Ukrainian schools, because you have a large number of children, you have a large number of women who are going to be wanting, in many cases, to work, and there's a natural kind
and there
of...
are Ukrainian teachers among these refugees
Yes, exactly.
as well.
I was just going to say,
administrators
the family that we offered our empty flat to, which was just sitting there, the woman is a kindergarten teacher.
Well, right, which is exactly a
So
resource
the
that's
hope
going to
is
be
that
needed.
if they have their own facility, a physical place, they can sort themselves out. We help them connect, we help them organize, and they set up their own schools. Okay, that's fine. But what about, Gabby, you say
money
that...
as well.
The money as well. The money will come from Warsaw, from Brussels, from around the world, I guess. So is that a better option than integrating them with Polish kids? Like, having their own schools on the assumption that they're going to go back soon? Or should they be integrated in Polish schools? And if they do that, there's language issues, there's this physical space issues.
Well, there's another family that I know who are sending their kid to Polish school. So, and I remember when I was in the UK, we'd have people coming over. Like we'd have, I'd have friends from Hungary come over at the end of the year, and they'd be kind of taken into the school. And they pick up the language really, really quickly. I have a friend who moved her kids, her two small 5-year-old kids, I guess, 5 and 8-year-old kids from Hungary to English. They did speak English, kind of, but they were mainly learning in Hungarian. They came to English school and they pick up the language really, really quickly. I mean, I teach English as well, and little kids, the younger kids, they don't really have problems integrating.
I would just like to avoid a situation, and unfortunately, I don't think it's completely avoidable. We're in August, which is 5 short months from now, that a very substantial number of Polish parents are going to find out, or they're going to be informed, that their kid cannot go back to the same school they've been going to for 2 or 3 years because it's full. It's, there's 40% more students, but the same amount of physical space. And sorry, we simply can't accommodate everybody.
But the other thing that has to happen, and the government,
and that's going to be a real problem.
What you said about like spreading it out across the country.
Yeah.
But the other thing that has to happen is that the population of refugees is going to need to be spread out, because the reason, it's obvious the reason they're coming to the big cities. The big cities are where is where everything's being distributed.
Where the railway stations are.
Yeah, exactly.
And they have existing connections here, resources, work.
Organisation, this is where people are coming together to organise things. But Poland needs to start looking at organising things so there's more of a network spread out rather than concentrating in the major cities.
I mean, there's some people I know kind of, came by train from Kiev, I think last Monday, arrived Warsaw Tuesday, stayed one night in Warsaw, next day on a train to Berlin, because, Warsaw's full.
Here's something I want to point out. I mentioned a couple of weeks ago I was in Kielce, and as I drove there, and as I was leaving Krakow on 29 listopada, I noticed that about 20% of the cars on the road were Ukrainian plates. And every single one of those cars that I saw, without exception, was a new or newish Mercedes, BMW, Audi, Toyota Land Cruiser. This is the upper class. Remember, there's no middle class in Ukraine. So this is the upper class, right? And so it's important to remember that not everybody from the Ukraine is, among these people that we see, at the border on Medica and whatnot. A lot of people have driven here in their nice cars, and they have plenty of money. And I'm looking at these cars, and I'm thinking, there must be tens of thousands of Ukrainian cars on the Polish roads at this point. I don't think that's an unreasonable, tens of thousands. Are we going to pretend that their car insurance policies are valid right now? Because they're not. Surprise! Nothing's going to happen if no car insurance company in Ukraine is going to handle the claim normally now. Statistically, it's inevitable with that many people, that many cars, that accidents are going to happen. Unfortunately, some of them serious. So what do we do? What does Poland do with suddenly tens of thousands of uninsured motorists on its roads?
Well, no, but that's not strictly how it is, because
why not?
Because insurance companies worldwide belong to, there are like umbrella organizations, like like there are for airlines and things. So
should we assume they're all properly insured, normally insured?
Well, I mean, within the legal.
Do you trust the insurance companies not to look at the tiny little writing and go?
No, well, of course, no, but that's a different. That's not the same thing. I mean, what John's talking about them is being not covered, and I'm saying that they are covered. Getting the money is a whole different story.
Yeah, well,
I'm not sure
maybe
if they would be covered.
Yes, because insurance companies have they interlink around the world. I mean, it's.
I'd be nervous if I got. If I was hit by somebody driving a car from Ukraine under normal circumstances, 6 months ago, I'd be nervous about being compensated, or nervous about having them. But now, forget it. I don't know, Josh. You could be right. I mean, at the high, it's like beer companies. There's only like 3 in the whole world, and the same is maybe true with insurance companies. Maybe at a higher level, they're all connected.
Well, no,
possibly,
it's not that. They're obligated, to use the American version, to pay into a central. I mean, one of the reasons why car insurance is high in any country is because insurance companies are obliged to pay for people who are uninsured. And because most of the bad accidents are caused by people who've stolen cars and aren't insured, that is actually the reason why car insurance is expensive wherever you live in the world.
As long as we're focusing on the problems or the issues associated with 2 million people arriving in your country in a matter of weeks, there's the real estate market here, and this has become a very common topic in the media.
It was screwed before.
The local and national media over the last few days, you're seeing a lot of stories about how suddenly there are no apartments available, and the market is extremely tight. I mean, something you advertise something and it's taken within hours. Plenty of landlords are actually doing the opposite of what you might think. They're making it very cheaper than a market rate, or even free in some circumstances. That's great. I don't know how long you can do that. Maintenance of real estate has costs, so we'll see how long that lasts. In other situations, it's going the way you would expect, that suddenly everything is 40% more expensive. Guys, we were having real estate issues before this whole war broke out. What's going to happen, again, August or September, when the students come back and they're looking for apartments? This can't last. This is going to result in political issues where, the price of things and supply and demand just create a situation where it exceeds, the anger and resentment is going to exceed the goodwill and the brotherhood we see.
Wasn't
now.
it? I mean, it was several weeks ago now, or maybe even several months ago, where we had a guest, Greg, is it? We were talking about real estate and everything. And I think it's kind of commonly understood in that field that before all of this conflict happened, Poland was approximately 2 million housing units short of what was required by just the Polish population. So we were already 2 million in debt, if you like, in terms of available housing, and now we've got 2 million more individuals. Okay, 2 million individuals doesn't mean 2 million housing
but
units,
still,
but
it adds to the debt. Yes.
Yeah.
I was looking over some of these articles that I've mentioned over the last week. As I said, they're everywhere in all kinds of media outlets. People focusing on the the consequences for the real estate market. And I was reading the comments, the reader comments, and there's a theme that is surprisingly common in these comments. And I'm kind of, I don't know, I'm wondering if there's something to it. They're suggesting that the Ukrainians who enter into a lease agreement now, let's say they agree to pay for 3 months in advance, 6 months in advance, they may or may not be able to get a job, but they still have this lease. They're still renting an apartment. But given Polish laws about evictions, when their money runs out, especially if it's a woman with kids, she has nowhere to go, she simply refuses to leave, and the landlord is screwed. Because, again, the law here is extremely pro-tenant. It takes an act of God, basically, to get somebody evicted, right? And so if these tenants decide to stop paying, the landlords have very little legal basis to help them. Of course, that's the risk they take on. And that's one of the things people have to be very careful about when you rent to anybody.
Well, isn't this...
but especially now under these circumstances. So what's going to happen, again, 6 months from now, theoretically, when millions of Ukrainians, maybe not millions, but thousands, who simply can't pay, not out of ill will, not of trying to be, a criminal or anything like that. They simply can't pay, but they have nowhere to go.
Well, are you
going to kick them out into the street?
Isn't this partly why the government is basically offering a package to all refugees, which is like a monthly allowance and, various other kind of bits and pieces and things like that. And I mean, of course, it's, it's not a huge amount. I mean, it's like we're talking sort of welfare levels.
And also subsidies to people who take them in
as well. Yeah. But I mean, there is actually the equivalent of like, more or less like unemployment benefit for all adult Ukrainians, and there's an allowance for children as well.
And they get pesos and everything. Right?
Yeah. So, they're legally allowed to get work, and they are receiving a basic level of funding. So that should mean that there is at least some kind of cushion. I mean, I very much get your point, certainly about like how difficult it is to get rid of like tenants who don't pay. But what I'm saying is that I think, whilst there undoubtedly will be cases of that, I don't think that it's going to be something that will be widespread.
Speaking of money, have you heard anything about where this money is coming from? I keep hearing Warsaw. I don't hear Brussels very much in this.
Well, that's another area which is maybe outside the scope of this program. But of course, in the middle of all of this, whilst with one hand praising Poland and Romania and Hungary for their sterling service in taking in refugees, Brussels is also withholding the COVID payments that are owed to.
Are we still talking COVID money?
Yeah. Well, it's billions and billions of euros, and it's Poland and Hungary that are the
sanctions for the way they're dealing with the judiciary. It's got nothing to do with the refugees. So everything to do with the fuckery within the judicial system and the kind of.
Well, I would say the fuckery is in the EU, of course.
Oh, boy. So they're more worried about withholding funds for COVID 2 years later than with helping with immediate needs now with the Ukrainians. Interesting. Gabby, you mentioned that the Polish government has made it possible
to get
pesos, which is the number you need for government services, basically tax ID, essentially, exactly.
And healthcare and all that kind of stuff. I
guess nobody's going to dispute this is a good thing to have them documented, in the system, so to speak.
I think it's much better to do that than just to have like large numbers of people who are undocumented and expected to fend for themselves, because it means that they can be in that kind of broadly bureaucratic sense kept track of, because they're also being given full access to NFZ health facilities. The
reality also is, here's the other thing, that some of these refugees may not end up going back. They may well still stay here.
No doubt about it.
And so
it's a question of what percentage.
So, a few years ago, we were talking about or even very recently, we were talking about the baby bust in Poland. Well, it looks like there might be a new lease of life for that as well.
You can't keep borrowing your neighbor's, kids.
No.
It's a different argument, different topic, but I see what you mean. But just to rewind, we were talking about the schools a minute ago. There's a potential for conflict, potential for political consequences. Think about the health service. Think about how many people, not only who need regular health service, but we suddenly have a lot of people who have, very specific and expensive medical needs. People on
counseling,
cancer treatment, diabetes treatment, this kind of thing. People with any number of severe medical conditions, and suddenly they are in the Polish medical service. And if you thought it was hard to get an appointment before for yourself or for a sick child, guess what? the same. It's even worse now. And again,
it could be even worse. You could go to the UK.
I know. Well, yeah, it's different words. And again, I'm trying to walk this fine line. I know we're in an era of good intentions, good feelings, and generosity, et cetera, but there will come a time that will diminish to the point where it's replaced by, hey, why do I have to wait so long to see a doctor? And I can't find a place for my kid in school. And just anecdotally, let me sneak this in here, Josh, one more thing. I shop quite a lot at Imyedin, which is close to me, and they have these big boxes where you can buy stuff at Auchan or any place else and just donate it. And I remember 2 weeks ago, they were full and overflowing. And now one of 3 of them is half full. 2 are empty and 1 is half full. I saw the same thing at Lidl yesterday. Same thing. Buy something and donate. It was full to overflowing a week ago. And now suddenly it's not even close. And I know this is anecdotal, but there's no way to maintain that super high level of support that we saw 2 weeks ago. It's impossible.
People forget about
financially, emotionally, and just it just can't happen.
Well, I think
we're seeing it come down to realistic levels.
Right. Also, I mean, there's at the moment the influx of refugees has slowed down a lot. I think you pointed out some newspaper report about the numbers of people coming through the station is much less. I think like at its peak about 10 days ago there were 100,000 people coming into Poland each day. That's now down to 50,000, which is still, of course, a lot of people. But
what if things heat up again in the Ukraine? What if?
Well, yeah.
And what if things take a turn for the worse?
I mean, there's the obvious thing that. And, very kind of heartwarming thing that, the moment this started, there was this tremendous outpouring of support and generosity, in material as well as, emotional terms. And it's not surprising. We're now 4 weeks into this. And, 4 weeks is not very long, but it's a difference of, it's not the same as 4 or 5 days. People have done the instinctive, like, yes, I can do this. They've, put food or clothing into the various things, providing accommodation. If there's nobody from the government or in the newspapers or on the TV saying, like, what we need is... I mean, there was a thing, wasn't there? Like, actually what they need right now is not so much food, but chocolates and sweets for the kids because they're just kind of, going crazy, boredom and everything. So, then people start bunging chocolate in the
diapers, and now it's sleeping bags.
But if people are told, then I think people are kind of happy to do that. I mean, rather than just indiscriminately buying a bunch of food and taking half for yourself and putting the other half in the box for Ukrainians, do stuff that's targeted. I mean, there are going to be people, I'm sure, that whether it's local authorities or the government or whatever, or people just organising themselves into groups that are actually taking responsibility for organising groups of communities of refugees, if you like.
And that's definitely happening.
Yeah, and it would.
And interestingly, the Ukrainians are organising themselves.
Well, of course,
as well.
Yeah.
So they're having get-togethers, baby days, all sorts of stuff.
Well, people are coming from the same places. Actually, I mean, it's not village. It's not Ukrainian villagers who are leaving. It's people from the big cities, the ones that we're hearing about in the news. So even if they don't actually know each other, by the time they pitch up, you're from Kiev, I am, I'm from Kiev, blah blah blah, and you bunch together. It's like it becomes a diaspora, doesn't it? Or diaspora, as I say.
Yes. Right now it's all about the humanitarian aspect. These people need help. They're in desperate situations. It's about ending the violence as quickly as possible. I think what we're talking about today, we're just kind of looking forward, not too far into the future, into a potential situation where it transitions into a different set of issues. Yeah. It's not temporary. It's kind of something
we need to be prepared for
between temporary and long term. Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, the numbers involved. I mean, Poland has imported, as I said, 5% of its population in the last month. 2 million with a 40 million population, and with every possibility, God forbid, another 2 million because of the extended hostilities. So fingers crossed. But I mean, it means major changes, and Poland is absorbing nearly all of the impact of this, refugees and whatnot. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, I didn't hear about Brussels stepping up. I'm sure other countries are. I know they are, both the national government and the individual people. I know that they're sending money.
Well, weirdly, because
Also,
sorry, Gabby, but I mean, you will know about this probably better than I. But I mean, Hungary has a population of what, about 8 or 9 million, is it? And I mean, they've had like something like
200,000, something like that.
Oh, is it only 200,000? I thought it was more like 500,000. But
I don't know. I'll check.
But I think that's more to do. Maybe that's border crossings. But like you mentioned, people who crossed into Hungary but have now ended up in Poland. So that's.
Yeah.
And actually, that's another point, of course, John, is that, probably most of those 2 million that have crossed into Poland are in Poland. But as I mentioned, I know people who spent 2 days in Poland and carried on to Germany. And,
Sure.
and Germany has, and
I think the most recent estimate is about not quite 1.5 million, 1.5 million are staying here.
Okay.
Again, maybe on the expectation they'll be going back soon.
Yes.
It's the language as well. That's the other thing you've got to remember. That you go to Hungary, you go to Romania.
Hungarian?
Who speaks Romanian? Apart from the Romanians, we love you, but who speaks Romanian apart from
Alex.
Romanian? No one speaks Hungarian. Ukrainian and Polish. It's quite it's the same language family. It's very similar. It's mutually intelligible. German, they're going to go to Germany and speak.
Well, actually,
Spanish. It's just
as far as I can tell, the bulk of the Ukrainians coming here are Russian speakers because they're coming from the east of Ukraine. Like Western Ukraine hasn't really experienced much in the way of like Russian hostilities yet.
But even so, the Slavic languages are still Slavic languages. They're easier to pick up.
You see, no. But I mean, there's been this, which I've kind of observed on a few occasions and mentioned in conversation to people, is that you have this slightly surreal experience of seeing people who look like they're Polish speaking in fractured English to people who are Polish, because English works better than expecting Polish people to understand Russian. And look, I don't speak Polish very well. I don't speak Russian at all. But the weird thing when you watch, like films or TV shows where the audio is in Russian, is that these odd words jump out, which are the same as in Polish, which kind of is a false friend. You're fooled into thinking that actually they're very, very similar languages, but they're not really mutually intelligible unless you've actually studied the language. And I mean, lots and lots of Poles have said that. And of course, after 1989, nobody wanted to learn Russian anymore.
I was talking specifically about Ukrainian and not Russian.
Yeah, and I was saying that they're not Ukrainian speakers.
Well,
most of them.
Sorry, that was... Well, in my experience, I can only speak for myself, but, the ones that I've met were Ukrainian speakers, and they communicate with us in Polish. So that's why they wanted to come here. And
lots of angles to this. I'm sure this is not the last time we're going to discuss these issues, although, again, the most important thing now is an end to the violence and doing what we can to mitigate the humanitarian problems right now. So, thanks for listening, everybody. KrakCast.pl is the site, of course. Check out all of our back episodes. And if you've got your own ideas about topics related to what's going on in the Ukraine and you want to give your own perspective, your own opinions, you are welcome, of course. Just message us at our Facebook page, and we'll make you famous as well.
Comment, we'll read them out next time.
Exactly. So, catch you next time on the KrakCast. Bye.